A useful analogy for the conflict between the ontologies of rationalism and empiricism can be drawn from the well-known dictum that in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. In H.G. Wells's story, The Land of the Blind, the sighted intruder into a totally isolated blind community is treated as mentally ill by their scientists and civic leaders, while a few of the more imaginative and mystically inclined people regard him as something of a visionary. Relative to the blind, the sighted man has a supersensory view of an aspect of reality. However, the blind are faced with a dilemma. If they accept that the sighted man is not deliberately trying to deceive them, either they simply have to believe, as a matter of blind faith, that the seeing man's incomprehensible visual statements are part of a true description of reality, or they have to dismiss his assertions as insane. It is impossible to describe the perceptions of sight in terms of the other senses. In any case, as far as the blind man is concerned, this discussion would verge on the meaningless. He would perhaps say, "You may be telling the truth, but the rest of us don't even know what you are talking about, let alone how to go about checking your story, so we cannot take it seriously as a scientific hypothesis. We cannot even begin to comprehend what would count as evidence for your idea. All that we are able to verify or falsify is your claim to extrasensory perception. But we are more inclined to believe that you are using telepathy when you demonstrate your extraordinary abilities. But as far as we are concerned, whether or not you are describing reality is a matter of indifference. It may be true in the way that the existence of God or fairies may be true, but it is not scientific. Even if we accept that you are describing reality, the only conceivable way it can be of use to us is if we rely absolutely on you. We would have to have complete faith in your wisdom and powers as a sort of high priest of a realm that only you can access. If we took you seriously, it would be the death of science and the beginning of a new, cold age ruled by superstition and insecurity, since the universe would become incomprehensible to us. We would have to sacrifice our independence and self-reliance for your truths." The sighted man might reply, "Far from making your universe more bewildering, my greater understanding and knowledge will help you to make more sense of everything. At first, it may take a leap of faith for you to take my ideas seriously as a working hypothesis, but this does not mean you will have to suspend your disbelief for long. You can never understand the universe in terms of the experience of colors, but does this matter? The truth about the way the universe works transcends the exact way we experience it. Although you can never know what it feels like to apprehend colors, you can in principle give some form of indirect meaning to their existence. Even if you cannot translate the term red into tactile equivalents, you can give it an abstract or logical meaning. You can intellectualize it. If you understand that words like blue, red, green, and yellow cannot occupy the same logical space, and that a sentence like, "This ball is entirely red and entirely blue," is nonsense, then you will have understood the meaning of colors. As seekers of the truth about the way the objective world is, we have to leave ourselves behind. The way we feel is irrelevant. Once you have understood the essential logical meaning of my statements, it is perfectly possible for you to participate in an investigation of their validity. You can determine whether or not they are logically coherent and consistent with your direct or indirect, experientially derived ideas of reality. Provided we are speaking the same logical language, we are talking about the same underlying reality. Once you have understood me, I am no longer special or mad, and therefore not a threat to your system. On the contrary, by handing you a coherent and rich theory of the universe, I am not only giving you something interesting to investigate, but am providing you with a few steps on the ladder to transcend the thraldom of your limited senses. I am inviting you to move beyond mere corporeal existence and up into the dispassionate realms of logic, where you can sniff the heady air of essential reality." The blind man would probably respond in the following way. "What you have said is very convincing, and I agree with much of it. I accept your implicit assumption that it is impossible to separate theory from evidence. There is no such thing as pure experience. The very act of sensing a quality in an object is theory-loaded. We have to learn that certain shapes, textures, dimensions, and so on correspond to, but are also separate from, a class of objects. In other words, our apprehension of even a simple object like a child's ball is logically laden. If I were suddenly given eyes, it would be impossible for me to make any sense of these impressions. I would experience a jumble of confusing feelings which would have absolutely no meaning. I would not be able to name even the simplest sensation. We need loads of intellectual baggage for every cognitive act. For the word ball, or our collection of precepts which we interpret as a ball, to have any meaning, we need a pretty comprehensive grasp of language and a correspondingly coherent idea of the world. It is also true that we can abstract the purely logical aspect of language from its references. We have grammatical rules which we can look at independently of the meaning. We can even devise perfectly comprehensible artificial languages devoid of semantic content. For instance, the purely syntactic metalanguage of mathematics is not only universally understood by all cultures and diverse scientific disciplines, but is so useful that we are inclined to regard these grammatical rules as representative of the rules of nature, and are seduced into the belief that logical structures reflect the natural order of things. Many of us behave as if mathematics is a natural language. One can imagine that mathematics, or even rigidly rule-bound natural languages, would be completely intelligible to intellectual beings who have the ability to communicate, but no sensory contact with the external world. To such an acorporeal being, reality would consist in nothing but grammatical or logical rules. He would understand the word red only in terms of its logical field. Just as the essential meaning of pawn in a game of chess is the moves it can make and its role as part of the structure and dynamics of the game, so the color red can be seen as perfectly understood if one knows how to use it within a language. Computers can do that with simple languages like mathematics, even simpler games like chess, and with other logically transparent languages. It seems to me that you are suggesting that all we need is to behave like a computer or other comprehensively briefed moron in order to demonstrate a grasp of transcendental reality. I am not trying to minimize the role of the intellect or the crucial part logic plays in our conception of reality. However, I strongly believe that sensory perceptions and the structure of our minds are totally inseparable. One without the other would result in either amoebas or computers, neither of which can ever begin to comprehend what we think of as the universe or what exists. Even if computers with no sensory experience could evolve something like intellects, their consciousness, and therefore their models of reality, would be so different from ours as to be beyond our understanding. They would, in effect, occupy a completely empty universe, where concepts such as existence or non-existence would have no meaning. There would be no distinction between what is or what might have been or might be. All possibilities would be equally real. You are inviting us to be like robots with regard to visual reality. You are suggesting that you can, so to speak, program us to simulate a real understanding of your visual world, such that we could engage in intelligible discourse about it. We might even be able to fool ourselves that we really understand. And no doubt the more accomplished among us, when talking to baffled students, would be heard to make remarks like, "You just have to forget about your common-sense way of interpreting the world," or, "Reality is not intuitively obvious." There is no way of arguing against such assertions, because one has to abandon one's normal rational tools, which we know how to use, but which are far too complex and opaque to analyze into a set of rules which we could give to a computer. Therefore, one cannot agree or disagree. One can only comply or turn away. The incentive for compliance is the fallacious intimation that refusal is the result of reactionary stupidity. A few may be impressed and wish to be initiated into the restrictive bondage of this perceived intellectual elite, but most of us will retain our mental independence, simply ignore it, and go about making sense of the universe in terms that we really understand and can believe in. You are the only person who will fully understand or unreservedly believe any of this, but that is only because you can experience it. To you, it will be ordinary common sense. Your reality is not and never can be our reality. Anything we have to say about the visual world can never be more than a sort of logical game with transparent rules, which may be fun, but cannot represent reality. Truth is not interesting or even meaningful in itself. All that really matters is our relationship with what we think of as the objective world. What we can apprehend, understand, and communicate is everything. Any reality that is inaccessible in principle, either through possible direct or indirect experience, or our ordinary inductive reasoning, is, as far as we are concerned, non-existent. In other words, any description of the universe that we cannot, in principle, verify or falsify by experiment or observation is meaningless. This is just a game played by mathematicians and theologians. While it is true that we cannot access reality through experience or common sense alone, it is equally true that we cannot do so only by logical or mathematical reasoning. This fictional discussion serves to polarize the positions of rationalism and empiricism, as well as to give a feel for the difference between natural reasoning and formal logic. It is, however, a deceptive oversimplification. It might erroneously suggest that all scientists are conscious of taking philosophical stands, or that they are implicitly exclusively committed to one of these views. All science is a selective mixture of both natural thinking and mathematical physics, and both rationalism and empiricism, with varying degrees of emphasis on each position. The extent to which individual scientists implicitly subscribe to one view or the other depends largely on their role within a particular scientific discipline. For instance, whether or not they are conscious of it, theoretical physicists are far more likely to behave in accordance with the rationalist position, whereas experimental or observational physicists are inclined to the more pragmatic empirical approach. Einstein interpreted the quantum physicist's philosophical position as a simple denial of the existence of what cannot be observed. Like the blind authorities in Wells's tale, he thought of them as saying that what cannot be apprehended does not exist. Thinking that he was engaging them in a reductio ad absurdum, he asked whether they could seriously suggest that the moon exists only while being observed. In a way, this is what their position committed them to, but it is not an absurdity when interpreted correctly. As I indicated previously, it is in fact an aspect of a perfectly valid philosophical position, and it is for this reason that Einstein was defeated in his attempts to refute their argument.